I think that's a very strong point in how our company evolved to what it's become today, is we learned humility. Prentiss had to go down to the bankruptcy judge every Friday morning and ask if it was permissible for us to pay our employees that week. I mean, none of this is given.
Hey there, and welcome to Under the Roof, the official podcast of Baker Roofing Company. I'm Todd Kavanaugh.
And I'm Matt Elban, and we're here to connect the dots between field and office, leadership and crew, values and action.
In each episode, we dive into the stories, lessons, and updates that matter to our team.
From safety and career growth to company milestones and good old-fashioned storytelling, it's all about living out what makes Baker, Baker. Let's get into it. Welcome back to Under the Roof. I am Matt Elban, and if you're joining us for the first time, please do yourself a favor, go back and listen to part 1 first. You will want the full picture. For everyone returning, thanks for coming back. And we're picking up right where we left off with Prentiss and Frank. And if part 1 gave you a sense of the history and the heart behind this company, part 2 is going to take that even further. Let's get back into it.
Must be one of those things, like, to try to take a step back for a moment and remember those humble beginnings. Your grandfather coming at, I didn't know he was 12 or 13. I always pictured he was 19 or 20, old enough to be an adult and join the army if he needed, I didn't picture him being so young when he came here. But to take a step back and see where it is today from those humble beginnings and everything in between, right? Like all of those years. I've only been here for 23 years.
It's hard to kind of fathom, to be honest about it, but I will tell you one thing I'd like to add, and it's not too late for y'all to start this. I wish I'd have kept a diary. I would have loved to put every single day, write a page of people, activities, projects, failures. I think it's fascinating to look back on your life, and I don't remember now. I mean, I bet you that we've had 10 or 15,000 people come through our office at some point for employment. I'll go out, and if I have a Baker jacket on, I'll have somebody stop by. Well, how you doing, Prentiss? He worked for us for 6 months, or maybe it was during the summer. It's incredible. And I wish I'd write a book if I had enough information and accurate to put it together. Another book. I don't think we told that story, quite frankly, to the extent we should have. But you got to be factual. You need to know. And I would love to include other people' story because they deserve a spot. I think it's at least informative, amusing to some point that just didn't really happen spontaneously. I mean, we had to sit there and say, well, how are we going to grow the business? I don't remember ever having a conversation about that in the early days, by the way. We grew because it was organic. We had people wanting us to do roofs, and we liked people. We liked putting roofs on. So it was just kind of a natural, I like to do business that way right now. I remember, though, at one point we talked and said, we have to show people that we can do a big job. I don't know, we were pricing that job in Lewisburg at the Russell Furniture Company. Yeah, and we got it. We did. We decided we're going to go get this job. We were low bid, and I remember we went back after the fact and looked at our estimate to figure out, what exactly our margin was on that job. And this was an expansion to an existing plant. I don't know if it exists now, but there was a lot of expansion joints where you joined these various additions to the original plant. And the line item for the material for the expansion joint, we had left blank. So we had
not on purpose.
No, not on purpose. No. So we looked at it and said, that's a $12,000 mistake. Back in the day, this is 1970, 1972. That's a tremendous amount of money.
It's a $100,000 mistake nowadays.
Apparently, that was how we got it. That's the first big job that we ever did.
So we made money on it?
No, but we
did the job. And we learned something from that. So, not yet. So, the estimates back then were a yellow pad. So you would write down, which I still think is a wonderful way. It's a slow way. So, but think about it, you build a roof on that pad, including the labor. It worked. We worked for probably 30 years of our life, and that's what we did. You take the blueprints off, if it was a new construction, with your little scale ruler and look at the specs and go from there. Pretty neat way of doing it, to tell you the truth. It worked for us.
When I first got into this business, I did estimating for a new home building, and I remember doing the same thing. And when I first started at Baker, I remember learning how to estimate repair work, and it was on a pad of paper, and it's changed a little bit since then.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Same general principle.
Yeah.
I've never been entrusted to estimate. That was a wise decision.
Watch what you ask for.
There's still time, Todd.
So speaking of estimating, your dad was known for his ability to estimate, and maybe on that yellow pad. Tell us a little bit about maybe what you guys learned from that. And
I don't remember learning a lot from Dad on that. He was a very good estimator, very cautious, and we had what they call a plan room for AGC, Associated General Contractors, and that was a association. It was a statewide association. It was national too, but they had plan rooms in each major city. So you could go into the plan room and there would be boxes of all the construction projects coming up in various parts of the state. We did a lot of state work back then. We did a lot of base work. Most of the private work those plans would be there too, but it was Davis & Jones or some contractor that had a contract to build that for the owner. But anyway, so our bid schedule, we get bulletins every week. So we would look through that, decide what we're going to bid, and basically we bid everything in our area. That was kind of our way of growing the business. And it worked. And Dad would be located down in the plan room downtown. It was in the Sherwater Hotel. And he would be responsible for the majority of the jobs that were taken off. And we helped price them a lot of times. He did a good job of that, and we kind of learned by osmosis probably. We were doing re-roofing estimates, Frank and I, and any repair work that we were doing. So, yeah, it worked. I'm sure we learned something from Dad just observing, but I don't remember ever having an instructional session where he said
He was not a teacher.
Yeah, so.
Frank, I feel like we can't tell this full story without, when I started here back in 2003, Mrs. Baker, Becky, I think was our CFO. And for me, and I know for many that have been here for a long time, she's part of that story. For me, the early years, which are later years, one of the things I remember hearing about Rebecca is she was the heart of the board. And I could see that as I was in my 20s when I joined, and she was very approachable for me. Can you talk a little bit about what you felt like her influence was on the company and maybe even on leadership?
She was very smart to start with, cared about people. I do think everybody loved Rebecca. She didn't agree with a lot of maybe business ideas we had, so she would counter that with conversation. You might say debate. And we always had a good outcome. Even though we might not agree, we would agree to disagree and move forward. So you might have a
Well, I think she was famous for saying during our board meetings when we came up with what she would consider to be an outlandish proposal, she would just stop and say, You can't do that. If she said that once at a board meeting, she said it 250 times. Probably a great thing about it, to our detriment, the guys on the board, was that she was almost always right.
I will agree with
So it's like out of 250 times to say you can't do that, she was probably wrong twice. But she loved people, and she thought people should be treated well, no matter what your status was at Baker and Company, what you did. If you were trying to do your job properly, then you should be rewarded commensurately with that effort, not necessarily with your position. And I think we all slowly learned during her tenure that was probably a very, very good way to treat employees.
I've not been here as long as Todd has, but in my time here, 14 years or so, I have seen that play out over and over and over again, where people treat people well and take care of them. So
It's our coaching way.
that's right.
You should.
Yeah.
We do.
One of the stories I think I learned early on is about the financial hardships that the company went through in, I think, 1991 and the bankruptcy. And I know a lot of that stemmed from, we've done a story like this before for getting loose on collections, and there was probably a number of other things that contributed to that. What we would love to hear is maybe not so much the circumstances, but more of like, what did it teach you as you had to walk through? It's probably really hard time. And I heard in the book, it says lots of 14-hour days and trying to figure out.
Well, we did that the whole time. That wasn't just a financial. Well, it was not unusual 14-hour day, but it had a huge positive impact on us. We became much better business people. We knew roofing, but we did not keep our eye on some things that were mighty important to be successful in roofing. I think a lot of our challenges back then, and we're responsible. I mean, we were the bosses, but we didn't have a strong accounting system, leadership, and we learned that that's an essential part of any business. So what are your costs? So when we went through this hardship, first of all, we were very fortunate to be on the front end of the hardship. So we knew we were struggling. When we ended up filing bankruptcy, we had to file bankruptcy because our two biggest vendors, well, one vendor and the bank said, you're going to file bankruptcy, Chapter 11, because that's the best way to get back healthy. Well, quite frankly, we were already pretty healthy. So we ended up paying the bank off. We didn't even need a checking account except to the flow of money in and out. They had no borrowed funds for a long time because the bank wouldn't, they asked us to pay it off, and we did. So we had turned it around. So we were profitable from the first month after filing bankruptcy. But we had had 2 or 3 bad years leading up to that, lots of bad debts. And we had a major problem in Charlotte, and we couldn't get that. We couldn't get our arms around it and get it corrected, and we did lose a lot of money there. And that was people driven too. And again, it goes back to us. I mean, we were making those decisions. We kind of outgrew our resources, people more than anything else. That can happen right now. In our business, you know, all the locations we've had, they hadn't been all successful, and you have to tend to them, get the right people. I don't know of any failure we've had where we've had the right people in that location, whether it's here, there, yonder.
It's comical in some way because you never forget these lessons. Was it Nietzsche that said, whatever doesn't kill you makes you stronger? I think that's quite appropriate for this particular bit of Baker history. We still look back on those days, and we did this as recently as a week ago. We were trying to remember the name of the forensic accountant that our
old country bumpkin from Nashville, North Carolina, David Bradley was his name.
Dave was famous for these homespun remarks, and he told us one day that quite simply his job was to convince the judge that this dog can hunt.
Don't think about it.
Somehow he did that. But we were at lunch the other day, Prentiss and Woody and I, the general threesome, and we were sitting there talking about this because you relive it constantly because you always need to remind yourself, well, we haven't always had the good old days. There were the bad old days.
Yeah.
He looked at the way we estimated jobs and said, well, how do you account for this? And how do you account for that? I mean, you've got all this stuff that you're paying out. You're not putting into an estimate how you're going to recoup those funds. So after we had been in business at that point, it was 1990. We'd been in business since 1915. It took us 75 years. We still didn't know how to estimate work properly. So finally, we learned that lesson, and I think it's come forward. But, you can never take any of this stuff for granted. And we do remember it, and we laugh. At the time it happened, it was not funny at all. But
And it was
5 years later,
humbling.
oh my gosh.
Not embarrassing necessarily, but it was humbling. And I think that's always a good joke. Humility is good for the soul, boy, frankly. Yeah.
Well, I don't know if you remember this conversation, Prentiss, but you and I had this one, probably 10 or 12 years ago. There was somebody here locally that was trying to woo me away and had mentioned, knew the history of this company and had said, well, that they had been through bankruptcy before, had said this to me, and you need to be careful which horse you hitch your wagon to, Todd. And I shared that story with you, and your response to me had sealed it for me, this is where I belong. And you'd said, I'm not going to apologize for that story. That has made me and us as a company who we are today. That's one of those things that has stuck with me. And I really appreciated that embrace of the learning process and the failure. And that has hung with me.
Well, I think that's a very strong point in how our company evolved to what it's become today, is we learned humility. Prentiss had to go down to the bankruptcy judge every Friday morning and ask if it was permissible for us to pay our employees that week. I mean, none of this is given. All he had to do was for a couple of weeks say, no, you need to pay all these debtors. And so, because I think we handled a bad situation well, we were able to come through bankruptcy in a way that for a couple of years, they taught our case at UNC Law for the way that bankruptcies should be handled and how what the outcome should be. And we were a shining example of how that was supposed to work. And we learned so much from that experience that book that Prentiss feels like he should write or should have written, 90% of it should be about that moment in Baker Roofing Company's life, because it was so transformative.
As we kind of wrap it up and come to a close, question that we all probably want to know is if you could say something to some of the younger people that are just starting out here at Baker. They're up on the roof now, they're doing the work. Maybe they're the toters from one side of the roof to the other. What's some advice that you might give them?
Keep at it, by the way. I still talk to our people every week, and I give them that message. They've got unlimited opportunity, particularly now, being an ESOP. It's incredible to think of the opportunity that every single one of our employees have. And it's new. Everybody doesn't get it. I see it. It shouldn't. At what are we in now? 8 or 9 months?
Yep.
But it's incredible. I just smile just thinking about that opportunity for everybody. I had somebody in my office yesterday. The young man had just popped in, just got hired in Baker Exteriors. I made him sit down. I said, how about taking a minute to sit down with me? So I think he got some encouragement from that.
I think about a story when Dylan was our first guest on the podcast. And he said, when I thought about what Mom, he said, would respond to this idea of the ESOP. And I knew the way she would respond, which made me know that it was the right thing to do.
Absolutely. Great thought.
How do you think Mr. Baker the First would respond to knowing where it is today? And how do you think he would react to?
Love every moment.
I think that is a fantastic place to put a comma on it, right? Not a period, because the story's not done. And just really appreciate you sharing these stories. Have a little bit of sadness knowing there's probably 1,000 others that we could get to tonight sitting on this couch. But really just I have a lot of gratitude for the years that you all have put in and continue to pour into this company. I know it's left a legacy for both of us on this couch.
Absolutely.
And probably hundreds of our listeners.
We hope we're not through.
Yeah.
We every minute of it.
Yeah. Thank you all.
Thank you. Do you want to ask your final question?
Yeah, why not? So I typically like to close with this one question. I'm going to direct it first, Frank, to yourself. And I'll tell a little brief story too. I've recently started getting into vinyls, and I ordered one from the UK that I thought was really obscure. It was this jazz artist. And I'm walking down the hallway here, and this happened a couple months ago. And Frank, I don't know if you remember this, but you had asked me, what do you got there? And I opened up, I said, oh, it's this jazz album that I stumbled on from Keith Jarrett, thinking like, I'm going to introduce something to the conversation. Well, of course, Frank had seen Keith Jarrett in concert 2 or 3 times, and he was not as obscure as I thought he was. But what I like to ask is, what are you listening to now? What's on kind of heavy rotation? What is the music or podcast, preferably music, that you are listening to at the moment?
Well, my last 50 years have sort of been circumscribed by Bruce Springsteen. I've been listening to Streets of Minneapolis a lot, at least recently.
Heard that recently, yeah.
In fact, I'm waiting to buy tickets this weekend for his 16-date tour of America. I'd like to start in Minneapolis and end it in Washington, but we're going to see how that goes.
I'm glad you didn't ask that question to me about that artist. I didn't know who he was. But I'm a gospel music guy. I've never heard a gospel song that I didn't like. So, yeah.
Well, thanks, y'all.
Thank you guys for being part of this. Appreciate it. It's great.
Thank you. Enjoyed it.
Yeah. That wraps up this episode of Under the Roof. Thanks for joining us and being part of the Baker Roofing family.
If you liked what you heard, share it with your crew. Hit the follow button and keep the conversation going wherever you work.
We're here to keep you informed, inspired, and included, because the more connected we are, the better we work together.
And as always, we'll leave you with this. We shall do good work, at a profit if we can, at a loss if we must, but always good work. See you next time.